Cool, perfect. I'm being nodded at by our marketing team, so that probably means I should start today's session. So welcome everyone to PureCyber's webinar today around the Cyber Essentials scheme. I say it's really great to have so many people here today. We've got a special luxury guest speaker as well. So it should be a really enjoyable session. Before we crack on and get started with anything, I suppose a few housekeeping rules we just have to mention. So, session is recorded, so everyone will have access to this recording after the webinar. Obviously, if you don't want to be involved in the recording, please speak up now or forever hold your peace. In terms of the questions, obviously, feel free to put them in the chat. We're not going to have hand raising throughout because that might mean that we last a little bit longer. Any questions you've got, please pop them into the chat and we'll answer them at the end. And I think that's probably it from a sort of a housekeeping situation. So before we get started and start sharing the slides with everyone, just some introductions from our side. So my name's John. I'm the Chief Information Risk Officer at PureCyber. With us today, we've got my colleague Rhiannon.
Hey everyone, I'm Rhi. I work as part of John's team, so I'm a governance, risk and compliance consultant. So I'm just here to chat through everything CE, really.
And then we've also got our super duper special guest today. We've got Joe.
Hello there, I'm Joe. I work for IASME and I help write the Cyber Essentials standard. So it's very nice to be here today with everyone.
So yeah, seeing as we're talking about the standard, we thought it's probably best to have the people who write the standard involved. So what we're going to kind of cover today, so let me make sure that I share my screen correctly. Let's get this perfect. Right. Hopefully everyone can see this now. It's populating. I'm looking at marketing team. A thumbs up. Let's just double check. Gotta love what live webinars, haven't you? There's always some sort of glitch that happens somewhere. Can anyone give me a thumbs up in the audience who can see that? You can see it? Right, perfect. Thank you very much. Beauty of technology. Right, so quick introduction to PureCyber for anyone who doesn't know us. We are an award-winning cybersecurity company. We've got a team of consultants that cover sort of the three pillars of cybersecurity. So we've got the offensive side, so the pen testing, and anything sort of, as the name suggests, offensive. We've got the defensive side, so that's the monitoring, the vulnerability scanning, the phishing simulations, all of that side of things. And then we've also got the governance pillar, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, where we cover everything from Cyber Essentials all the way up through to ISO 27001 and various frameworks of that. And as I said there, we are passionate about sort of protecting all companies and individuals from cyber threats and sort of empowering businesses to make sure that they've got the tools to safeguard themselves. Today, what we're going to cover is, as I said, we're going to look at what is the scheme. So, the key features and the purpose of Cyber Essentials. We're going to look at the benefits of Cyber Essentials as well. And we're going to look at some key statistics that come away with it as well, just because it's always good to contextualize this with everything at all. So, again, for anyone who's not aware of the Cyber Essentials scheme, it was born in about 2014. It was a government-backed scheme. Basically, the whole reason around it was that the government were kind of looking at sort of high-profile businesses that were being targeted by cyber attacks. They realized that actually there was a common pattern with a lot of them, where if they implemented a lot of the basic controls that are being pushed, then they would have prevented or could have prevented these attacks from happening. And that's why the scheme has come about. It is about implementing those basic security controls and having that baseline of cybersecurity that could help to prevent against a lot of the more common cyber attacks out there. So first off, what we're going to look at is the scheme in general. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague Rhi, so you don't listen to me talking for this entire webinar. So Rhi, can you sort of tell everyone on the webinar about the Cyber Essentials scheme and what it is?
Yeah, of course. So like John just touched on, it is a scheme backed by the NCSC, and it's not about kind of tying you up in any compliance red tape or anything like that. It's more about just getting to a baseline standard of cybersecurity. It's pretty unique and it's the only one we kind of come across where it's purely based on your technical controls. It's just focused on taking away any low-hanging fruit available from like internet-based attacks. So I'll super high level just go through the 5 key controls that are part of the standard. Joe's going to go over in a bit why they're so important, but I'll just touch on why they are. So the 5 of them are firewalls, secure configuration, security update management, user access control, and malware protection. And initially, sometimes, especially if it's your first time looking at the standards, you do think, whoa, that's a bit jargon heavy. I can't manage my configuration, anything like that. But they're meant to be basic and they're meant to be achievable pretty much for any organization looking to do it. So if I start with firewalls, all it's really asking is that you have a boundary on your network, and on that boundary you have a firewall in place. So typically this is just going to be a router. That's a hardware firewall, completely fine. If you're a one-man band or you're sharing an office space for whatever reason, you're sharing a router maybe, that's fine. You can use your software firewall as your network boundary. And again, there's no need to go buying anything expensive or flashing lights. If you've got, say, a Windows OS, you've got a firewall already built in there. Secure configuration, again, seems like a bit of a big task, but all it's really asking is that you don't have anything standard and out of the box that might be public knowledge. So on your firewalls, on your accounts, have you changed your default password? If you have a device that has a lot of maybe bloatware on, or if you have unnecessary accounts that no one's really going to use, just get rid of them. Are your ports configured correctly? That's mainly just making sure you've got the remote desktop protocol blocked whenever necessary. So again, one of those ones that seems like it's going to be a big control, but it's super achievable for everyone. Security update management, much the same. So this is making sure that your operating systems and all the software that you're using is up to date. You can do this mostly by enabling auto updates. Super simple, works well for a lot of people. If you're in a larger organization, you might come up with a slightly different system just for your own rollout processes. But as long as you have all critical and high updates installed within 14 days of release, you're going to be good to go there. User access control. This is just about making sure that you are completely in control of who has access to your accounts and who has access to what bits of data. So all you're going to need is a process in place to make sure that when you're provisioning an account, they are approved by someone in your organization and you're just giving that person access to what they need to do their role. So not everyone is going to need access to every single service you have and bit of data within your organization. In reverse, if you have someone leaving your organization, you're just going to be making sure that once they leave, particularly if they're disgruntled, they're not able to access any of your accounts anymore or take any data out of your business. A big one here as well to manage is your admin accounts, which Joe will explain why it's so important to manage these later. But it's just making sure that people only have them when they absolutely need them and that there is a formal approval process in there, particularly so you can track who has access to those accounts. And then final one, malware protection. Again, like I mentioned earlier, if you have a Windows or Mac OS, comes already built in. So again, no need to go and buy anything expensive to complete this process. And if you have any phones or tablets, as long as they're not jailbroken, you are pretty locked down into what your staff will be able to download. So you should be good to go there. And that's the 5 key controls from a pretty high level.
Awesome. No, that's brilliant, Rhea. I think the really key point that I always pick up on with all of this is there's a lot of stuff that are already in businesses that they might not know about, but are already meeting the key controls. Like you say, if you have a sort of out the box laptop and you've already got 2 of the controls probably covered, regardless of what you do as well. I mean, in terms of, I suppose, Cyber Essentials and who it aims at, really. I mean, where's what does it benefit from? Who are the people that benefit from that scheme?
Well, I think to be fair, we'd both say it's pretty much applicable to all businesses and organizations. I've never come across one sector that doesn't find it helpful or is completely unable to achieve it. The beauty of how IASME has made it is that it's suitable for the micro and smaller organizations as well that maybe don't have the resource to do anything bigger with any kind of large governance accreditations. So yeah, we see everyone from like education, manufacturing, finance, everyone can get through it. In particular, the NCSC and IASME have made it achievable in that they've recognized, say, if you're a college, you need to go through it. super difficult to manage if your students are accessing your network on their own devices that they own. So they're going to be out of scope for the assessment. So it's really been made in mind of getting everyone through the accreditation without any bumps. So yeah, pretty much available for all. Pricing starts from micro through to large, but from my experience, I'd say it's pretty much suitable for everyone.
That's what it was aimed at, wasn't it? It was always a low-cost scheme with low-cost implementations behind it, as long as you're doing the basics right and you're putting that security baseline in place. But but the scheme kind of not dictates, but guides people on. Then it should be achievable for everyone, isn't it? So it's always a really, from our point of view, I suppose from PureCyber's point of view, and Joe might agree or disagree later. It is that great sort of way of helping companies to go through something that cybersecurity is always daunting. Where do you start? What do you do? And it is a great way to sort of put those basic controls in place. I think it's the VNC class it has. It's the locking the front door type situation and reminding people of that. But it is that put the lock on your front door rather than leaving it open so that burglars can walk straight in and do whatever they want to do. I think from our side as well, I mean, we've got a couple of sort of key benefits here. Reed, do you want to kind of go through these and sort of see what we see from customers as well?
Yeah, sure. So probably one of the number one reasons people do go for Cyber Essentials accreditation is you want to build trust. We all usually see on the news when someone suffers kind of any kind of cybersecurity incident, usually your clients and customers will lose a bit of their trust there. Your reputation might take a dip. Whereas if you go through the CE process, you're kind of proving to people, yes, we are doing everything we can to look after the data that you give away to us. It's just showing that you're being responsible with what you're doing with your cyber. So in particular, if you're in finance, healthcare, IT, education, people really want to value that what you're doing with their data is pretty sound practice. Also, when you complete the accreditation, you do get a certificate. There's a logo you can pop onto your website if you'd like to. So you do get that stamp of approval there of like, yeah, we've done what we can. Alongside completing it, we do find as well you get a lot of increased opportunities. So you're opened to new business or tender processes that maybe you couldn't get with Cyber Essentials. So particularly if you wanted to bid to work in the supply chain for any kind of government contracts, the NHS, any banks, usually they're going to ask you to have C as a minimum. And if you don't, that's kind of the end of the journey there. As well, if you're going for anything where people have a lot of cybersecurity due diligence questionnaires that you may have to do before. Sometimes if you want to save time, you can say, yeah, got C, done it, sorted, and that's you done. So it really can kind of open your horizons to new business opportunities. And then the third reason we've got up there, you meet industry standards. So the NCSC, when they created it, they really had best practices in mind. And again, it's never going to push you to buy anything you don't need. It's just asking you to put those baseline controls in place, which are pretty much agreed across the cyber industry as a great way of taking away that low-hanging fruit. And then a super important one, which I think John will agree with me, we see a lot of the time when someone suffers a breach or any kind of attack, it can be through your supply chain. It's pretty common, and it's usually one of the weakest spots that you have. So once you have Cyber Essentials, I know myself from working with different clients, they start to feel a lot more confident of, actually, I'm doing what I can. Now I can ask my supply chain, do you also have Cyber Essentials? And you sort of strengthen your whole infrastructure from there. And then the final one, you're improving your cyber processes. So like I mentioned earlier, this has not been created to kind of tie you up in red tape or make your daily business practices any slower. And in fact, if you have your cyber processes in place and pretty efficient, it can actually help speed up your business and kind of streamline everything for you. And that's the five that we've kind of top five benefits that we see day to day.
Yeah, I mean, that's again a great point, isn't it, Reva? It shouldn't be red tape and it shouldn't be something that slows a business down. It should always be something that helps to enable a business to probably, I suppose, have better processes. They don't have to be strict. I mean, we always say if you're changing your business to meet a security standard, then there's probably something that's wrong in the middle somewhere. If you're using a security standard to improve your business, then that's the best way of doing it, isn't it? I think with the Cyber Essentials, and for anyone again who doesn't know about it, so there's a Cyber Essentials is the baseline of what the NCSC have always pushed for all companies to get. Above that, there's an extra level, which is Cyber Essentials Plus. So to touch on that a little bit, so Cyber Essentials Plus is a technical audit of your IT systems to verify for what you've done within Cyber Essentials, within the self-assessment there, is in place and is working. There's multiple testing areas that it goes through, but they all relate back to the 5 initial controls that we mentioned. So for device patching audit, the mobile device audit, they're all related to your security update management controls that you'd have listed in Cyber Essentials. Testing malware defenses, reviewing email filtering, and testing web browsers. They're again all related to either the malware protection side of things or the secure configuration side of things that are referenced in the earlier controls. The reviewing admin account segregation, again, it's all around the admin accounts, and the reviewing the MFA controls is all around the MFA and that sort of the secure configuration of that device. The beauty of Cyber Essentials Plus and where we see it as a benefit. So I suppose from our personal experience, we see a lot of companies who will go through a Cyber Essentials process and they will stop there. Now, might be right for some people, but we always see that Cyber Essentials Plus is a great way of putting yourself above the baseline and making it sort of almost like a competitive advantage to people in your industry who might just have Cyber Essentials. It's a great way of just proving that you've gone that extra level and you've sort of demonstrated your commitment to take that next step up and to keep improving and keep improving. It gives you that. I suppose the main benefit is that independent validation around the technical control. So it's not just you saying, yes, we do it. It's somebody else proving that you do it. It would almost be like if you took your car to an MOT and went along and said, yes, I've got some good brakes and I've got good tires and I've got good, my car is in good condition, and somebody checks your answers and go, okay, yeah, cool, perfect. But the MOT is there to design to test whether actually that's right or not. So that's why Cyber Essentials Plus is such a good benefit to have above Cyber Essentials. I think in terms of the sort of the key statistics that we always take away from this, and I know Joe will probably laugh because he always sees the first stat that comes up. With Cyber Essentials, 92 when you implement Cyber Essentials and you do it effectively, there's 92% fewer insurance claims that are made by organizations with those controls in place from a cyber insurance perspective, which again is a great almost validation of what the scheme is trying to do. Put the basic controls in place to stop, as Ree said, the low hanging fruit from a cyber attack perspective, and then you have less impact going forwards. And so there 69% of organizations who have gone through the scheme believe it has increased their market competitiveness. As we mentioned earlier, Cyber Essentials it's used on a lot of tender documentation now. If you want to go into a public sector, you want to go to government, or your suppliers might be asking for you. And that is another reason that it's really good to do it, because you can almost open yourself up to new markets by proving that you have a good level of security in place. And then I think my favorite stat on there is that the 88% believe that Cyber Essentials has improved their understanding of cybersecurity risks, which is great because that's the whole point of the scheme, is implementing this sort of almost the baseline controls and the baseline of what was expected from a security, which then helps people to understand what the risks are around cybersecurity. If you're new to the scheme, it is a great entry point, sort of to go through it all, really. So I think that kind of covers where we're looking at. So in terms of the scheme, as a high level overview, in terms of the key statistics. So I think it's only right now, let me get this right, is to go and bring in our expert for the day, is Joe. So again, Joe, thank you so much for jumping on and talking to us about this today. So we've gone high level. We've given everyone the what the controls are and the 5 key controls. So I think this is over to you now to talk to us about why are they really important? What is the benefit of doing it? What's the real world impact of them all?
Thanks very much, John. That's fantastic, and I have to say it's a very good explanation of what Cyber Essentials is in terms of, yes, as you've been saying, it's meant to basically lock your doors and windows. It's not going to protect you against advanced persistent threats or particularly targeted threats, but it is going to protect you from the equivalent of someone coming along, trying the door, or in this case, trying the most obvious thing and just seeing if it works. So really, it's going to protect you against opportunism and, very importantly, automated attacks. Because unfortunately, in the world we live in, there are people who've written software that spends all day scanning the internet for connections, seeing what's on the other end of that connection, and seeing if there's an exploit available or something that can be done to break into those systems. And a lot of Cyber Essentials is designed to prevent things that can be automated. Or, as I said, people just trying the most obvious thing. Oh, I'm trying to get into this account. Did they use password as the password? Well, look, yes, they did. It's that sort of thing that we're trying to prevent. And so these 5 controls are what the NCSC identified as being the most obvious routes into systems and the most obvious ways of attacking them for low skill, low effort or automated attacks. So the first one we've got is firewalls, and very simply, firewalls are everywhere nowadays. They're in your router. Large organizations will have a physical firewall. They're built into your laptops and your computers. The main thing with firewalls is to make sure that they're switched on. So on a Windows machine, you need to make sure that Windows Defender's turned on. It's very easy to do. You can just type firewall into the search bar and you'll get a dialog which will tell you. Macs have XProtect, which performs a similar function, and these are actually pretty good pieces of software. Microsoft particularly have upped their game in the last few years concerning this stuff. So really, if you've got your Windows Defender or your XProtect switched on, that will protect you against a lot of things that are trying to get into your system, because the logic is it keeps out unauthorized connections. And if we're trying to protect against internet-based attacks, if they can't connect, they can't attack you in that way. The next one is secure configuration. Now, when we're talking about secure configuration, one of the most important things is make sure if you've got software on your system that you're not using, that it's removed, because all software has vulnerabilities. If it's on the system and there's a known way of, for example, carrying out an attack using flawed software and it's on your system, then people could use that software that you may not be paying any attention to. You may have forgotten it's there. It's better to only have stuff on your system that you actually need and you actually use, because otherwise you run the risk of, oh, I installed this software 3 years ago, never updated it, never looked at it again, forgot I had it. But there are things out there that will try and exploit unpatched and unupdated software. Another important part of that is only have user accounts that are actually being used. And this is especially important in large organizations where you may well have hundreds, possibly thousands of accounts. And if these accounts are just lying around, no one's looking at them, again, no one's paying attention to them, these are the kind of things that an attacker might well say, well, it would be very useful for me to have access to a user account or even an admin account. And so it's better to make sure that any accounts that aren't needed are removed from your system. Another one, which is very, very obvious, but is very important, is change the default passwords. So a lot of equipment and a lot of things like routers and stuff like that, out of the factory, they have a default password that you can literally go to a page and look up what's the default password for this. And therefore, anyone wanting to get access to those devices would be able, if you haven't changed it, to look that up and get it in less than 30 seconds, because it's publicly available knowledge. So it's very important to change your default passwords. And another one, which seems quite obvious, but is very important, lock devices. Let's say you lose your phone or your laptop, it's going to make it a lot harder for someone to do something nefarious with it if they can't get into it because they don't have the password, or it might be a password, it might be a fingerprint, whatever it is. But make sure that you've got some form of locking mechanism on your devices to stop that happening. Can we have the next? Oh, yes, very good. No, one before that, sorry. Okay, so security update management. Again, this is really important because, as I mentioned previously, all software has flaws in it. Over time, these flaws come to light and people find ways to exploit them. And that means that if your operating system is no longer being maintained by the producer, very quickly, people will find ways of attacking your operating system remotely, which can be easily put together, easily automated, and easily carried out. And the way to prevent against this is to make sure they're kept up to date. So wherever possible, make sure you have your auto updates turned on for your operating system. There's obviously cases where, again, large scale systems, you might need to take a bit more care with this because there's a possibility that updates may prevent your systems from working. But certainly when you're talking about small and medium enterprises, make sure the auto updates are turned on for your operating system. And the same goes for the applications you're running as well. Wherever you've got an application, go to it and say, can I turn on automatic updates? There's obviously some systems, Chrome is one where it's automatic by default, but it's very much the case nowadays that these things are there, they do work. The thing to do is just make sure that they are switched on and operating. And the actual rule for updating things is you have to update them within 14 days. Now, that might seem like a very short period of time, but it's actually the case that in many cases, exploits are developed for known flaws very, very quickly. We have in the past said maybe it should be a week, but because you have to strike a balance between practical considerations and security, 2 weeks is the mandatory period for updating things. What do I updated? And finally, you come to the case where if you've got stuff that you absolutely have to use that is not supported, part of Cyber Essentials would be you separate that and you put it on its own network. You put it on a subset. And what we mean by that is it's separated using a firewall or a VLAN configuration to make sure that it doesn't have a direct connection to the internet, so that any attacker would have to hop from one network to the next to get to it. Because obviously there are cases where people have mission critical software and systems that aren't being updated. The remedy in that case is you make sure that they're separated from the internet via a firewall or a VLAN configuration. User access control, again, very vital. Now, the first thing to do is make sure you keep track of who has your accounts and that they have unique credentials. The reason for this is obviously that if you've got an account and 5 people have the access details to it, then that means that, let's say an attacker gets these details, it's then very difficult to identify who accessed it, when that happened. If 5 people have the details, who else knows where they've written them down? It's much better, and it's in fact a requirement to have each account has its own separate credentials for each user. And when you come to admin accounts, one of the things I always like to mention is many times when you buy machines, the initial account that's installed is an admin account. And people think, oh, well, that's great. It's my machine. I want complete control over it. The problem with it is that if you're running an admin account, and let's say you click on a dodgy attachment or you go to a website and click on a dodgy link, anything trying to run software or install things will be able to do that with admin privileges. Whereas if you're using a normal user account, when you're trying to install software on a user account, you will usually get a request for additional credentials. And that could mean the difference between ransomware, spyware, anything like that being installed and not being installed. Because if you need an additional set of credentials, then the attack will fail if you are using a user account. So that's why it's very important to use a user account in day-to-day work. And I think that admin accounts are one of the things that really you should only use them when you really, really need to. People tend to go, oh, well, but I want to have complete control. But really, you're presenting the risk there that an attacker would gain complete control of your machine. So it's very important to not use admin accounts except when strictly necessary. The next thing is MFA. Oh, sorry, we haven't finished that one yet. Yeah, MFA is really, really important nowadays because it's very easy to brute force, guess, steal passwords and logons. If many people use their email address as their login, so that's one piece of information that can be easily deduced. Secondly, if people using passwords that are silly, like things like the wife's birthday, the dog's name, the favorite football team, again, people can go through your social media and often make a pretty good guess as to what that password might be. With multi-factor authentication, they would need to have possession of a device that you own or some additional piece of information in order to access the systems. So wherever you can turn on MFA, turn it on, because again, it's going to save you from a lot of attempted attacks. And we finally got to malware protection. And again, nowadays, this is something that on most types of machine, most systems, it is there, it's pretty good. You just need to make sure that it's switched on, and it will save you from a lot of potential hassle. And basically, the reason for this is that it's meant to be a layered kind of defense. It's meant to keep an eye out for malicious websites. So if you've got something that's going to be downloaded through a link or something like that, if you can't go to the website, it can't be downloaded. If it does get on your machine, this stuff will hopefully detect it and go, no, that can't be used. And if it should get to the point where it tries to run, this stuff should prevent it from running. And all of these things are what's going to stop a lot of heartache and trouble from fairly common types of attacks. So, like I said, the main thing is to make sure that these things are switched on and active, because software these days is pretty good. Yes, threats are ever evolving, but from the type of attacks we're protecting you from, Cyber Essentials, a lot can be done with standard out of the box kit. It doesn't require a large investment of time, money, or expertise. A lot of it is just making sure that these things are switched on and operating. And with that, I will hand you back to John.
Thanks, brilliant, Joe. Thank you very much for that. I think it's a really important piece, isn't it? It almost lends into a Cyber Essentials Plus world. I don't know if this is your thoughts on it, because yes, you might have that on a machine, you might have a machine for a couple of years old, but the Plus process will then help you to identify whether something is working rather than just assuming it's working because it's
Absolutely, yeah.
a standard device, isn't it?
Yeah, so with Cyber Essentials Plus, with Cyber Essentials, the normal one is a self-assessment. You fill in your form, it gets marked. We have to take it as read that what you're putting down there is what's actually there. With the Cyber Essentials Plus, they will run a vulnerability scan, which will flag up this is out of date, this configuration is wrong, this needs change, whatever it might be. So you will have a far greater level of assurance, especially from a, let's say, a client perspective. If someone wants to know if you're taking your cybersecurity seriously, if they see you've got a CE Plus certificate, they know that your system's been tested and meets the actual requirements of Cyber Essentials. Which is why the CE Plus is regarded as giving a fairly decent level of assurance. They know you've changed your default passwords. They know you keep your stuff up to date and all these other important things. So that's essentially the difference between the two.
I think that's it, isn't it? The default password is always one that gets me, because the amount of like IoT devices that are out now that just come in a box, there you go, default password, and off you go. It's a
Many of them,
very
yeah, many of them, the instructions say the logon is admin password. Well, you could have guessed that. Anyone would have guessed that, they'd be the first thing you try. And obviously that means that anyone else could potentially access those devices. And like I said earlier, if these default passwords are available at the click of a button, then it's no security at all if you don't change them to something that's a bit more robust. And that's why it is very important.
exactly that. No, I think that's it's really good. And thank you for jumping on today, Joe, and going through all that with us, because it gives us it really gives us an insight into what you see from your side of it. Obviously, being involved in a lot of the conversations with the NCSC and helping design the scheme and the way that it's done, you can really see the value behind putting these controls in place, which is why we wanted to kind of touch on a few case studies that we've seen. So some that are publicly known, some that aren't publicly known, so that we can give everyone on the webinar an insight into how the implementing the Cyber Essentials controls could have prevented these attacks from happening. I'm not going to say should. I'm not going to say would, because there's nothing in cybersecurity that gives you that silver bullet. But you can see a sort of a common pattern with all of these, where if the initial controls have been put in place and implemented effectively, there is a chance that these businesses wouldn't have had the level of impact that they've had. So, from a public perspective, we've had things like the KMP Logistics Group, so huge multi-million pound organization. They had a ransomware attack which was costing them 2.5 million. 3 months later, they collapsed as a business because they couldn't recover. And the whole reason that the attackers were able to get in initially was that the organization had a weak password policy. So they didn't have a strong password policy in place, and they also didn't have MFA in place. Just like Joe just mentioned there, having MFA in place could have been the, I'm saying could, I'm not saying would or should. I will repeat that multiple times because I can't say that it would
Well,
have
John,
guaranteed it, but
what I would say is, I obviously look at a lot of these cases, and it's almost invariably the case that it wasn't some super ninja hacker who did it. It was someone trying an obvious password, or no MFA meant that someone just gained access or stole someone's credentials and used that. It's very rarely something very interesting and technical. Sometimes it is, but in many cases, it's things that could easily have been stopped while having these baseline security procedures in place.
it's the opportunist in the world, isn't it? As we said
Exactly.
really right at the start, it's locking that front door and making sure that the opportunistic sort of attacks and the easy run automated ones, like you said, don't happen. It would be a much easier world for all of us if it didn't. And then, yeah, like you said, you got the British Library there, so their recovery costs were 6 to 7 million. Again, unpatched systems, no MFA. So security up. So if you relate that back to Cyber Essentials controls, security update management, and the access controls, Transport for London, weakness in unpatched systems. So it comes back to that security update management. So it all kind of they all map in to another. And I appreciate that these organizations are very large, they're very complex. There could have been other intricacies that happened in these attacks that, weren't published at the time, but this is the information that's come off the back of these as well. But in terms of cases that we've seen, so I think these always, the ones you hear about on media worthy are always interesting. I think some of these that you don't hear about from the media are actually just as interesting. So we've seen a case of a IT managed service provider, so an IT support company who had a vulnerability exploited on their sort of remote monitoring management tool. So that's how that tool is what's used for them to be able to help support their customers and help to bridge that connection so they can work on systems for all their customers. There was a vulnerability that was on there that they didn't patch. The vendor pushed out the update, no patch was enabled, and then a cyber attacker was able to gain access to the IT provider systems and then spider out to all of their customers as well through that same issue. So it caused them huge devastation and loss and sort of impact and probably a bit of heartache that went around with it as well. But it was all because they didn't patch that initial system that they were told to multiple times. We got the accountancy firm there as well. So this was where an attacker was able to get into the accountancy firm systems and pull data from there, which obviously was very sensitive in nature. And that was due to the fact that had poor password management. There's a common theme happening here, isn't there? I believe they didn't have MFA in place. Again, another common theme that we talk about within the controls. And as Joe alluded to earlier, when he was going through the sort of the way that you sort of map these controls in and why it's really important, they didn't have an unsegregated account. So their admin account was running as their daily user account. And again, that was the one that was exploited, which caused them more pain than if it was a user account that was in there as well. So you can see these sort of patterns emerging here. And I think the one that we didn't see personally, but we've read about quite a lot and gone into because we're cool like that, aren't we? Ree? Is the law firm example. So I'll pass over to you because you're cooler than me and read more about it than I did.
Yeah, sure. So, like John said, this isn't one we had any hands-on experience with, but we did read their ICO report because that's the life you lead as a governance consultant. But basically, what had happened was it was a law firm and they had big fine from the ICO, so £98,000, which is pretty devastating for your day-to-day business. But basically, they received such a hefty fine because after the breach, it was pretty much evident that they had been very negligent with their cybersecurity. And the big things, if you were to look through the report, if you have that kind of time, the big things were they failed to implement MFA across their cloud services, and they didn't have a very high security patch in place. So basically, and another thing that had happened was they had attempted Cyber Essentials, failed, and instead of remediating what had gone wrong, they'd gone, nah, not for us, don't worry. And so that really just showed they hadn't put any effort to put those baselines in place to just look after their clients' data. And in the breach, it ended up with a lot of very sensitive court bundles being posted onto the dark web. So again, like John said, Cyber Essentials isn't a silver bullet, nothing is. But if they'd had the controls in place of MFA and strong patching regime, probably wouldn't have happened or wouldn't have happened to this extent. So it's a super interesting one.
The other thing I'd say about that, really, is that the ICO do look at these things to gauge what your attitude was.
Yeah.
And in many cases, if they see that you were fulfilling those requirements, they will much more likely to look at it as, okay, you were doing these basics, and that would usually translate to less fines and sanctions against the company if they were seen to be taking this stuff seriously. In this case of a law firm, they obviously took the view that, well, they weren't taking it seriously. It's probably why they fined them 98k. They may well have got away with less than that if they'd taken this stuff a bit more seriously. But then again, the breach may not have happened if they'd done that. So
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah, it's all about that negligence, isn't it? I think that's the one bit that's really interesting. The reason why we try and sort of scale it down, because for public cases, they're millions and millions and millions of pounds. But actually, as a law firm, they obviously had a certain size to them. They were concerned about security, but the negligence around it really, really hit home with that as well. So I think it's always good to kind of bring these cases to light, because I think that's where everything that we've talked about so far, so the scheme, the benefits, the impacts, the cases, it all kind of comes to light when you then can replay that back internally as well, which I think is really, really good. So I think in terms of where we go next, it's a bit more about PureCyber for people who don't know us and what we do and why we run through this scheme. So I think Cyber Essentials, as I said, it was born out of 2014. Our CEO and founder was one of the first ones to become an accreditation body through IASME for it. We've been part of a scheme for 10 years. We've got multiple different hats that we wear within that scheme now as well. So multiple accreditation body ability. That's the wrong wording, but I'll go with it in a moment. We've got over 10 certified assessors in the company, and we are a consultancy that's there to sort of help companies to meet the standard. There was a new scheme that came out last year, but I don't know if people are aware of it yet or not. So within Cyber Essential, with IASME, you have a certification body, so somebody who can kind of mark your assessment. But then you also have a new scheme that was released last year called the Cyber Advisor Scheme, which was backed by the NCSC, which then also gives you an additional sort of verification on top to say, well, you're okay to mark the scheme, but you're also really embedded into the scheme. I think that's the right way of putting it into the Joe, and able to provide advice from a non-biased standpoint.
yeah, yeah. So cyber advisor, I think the concern is because this is quite an unregulated industry. In theory, my mother could start up an MSP. There's no regulations as to what you need to do. The idea of cyber advisor is it's a bit like taking your car to a garage. If you know the garage is trustworthy, then you're happy to have the work done. But I think the concern from the NCSC was that people will go somewhere for advice, get given advice that boils down to buy our product, or when they may not necessarily need to. Cyber advisors are meant to provide a qualified, trustable source of information for this stuff. So that's what it's for, really.
Yeah, and it's so important with this scheme as well, isn't it? And I mean, we will talk about it a bit later on, won't we, Ria, about some of the common challenges that people find, but it is where to go, who to speak to.
Exactly.
I mean, as part of what we've done over the last 10 years, I wouldn't even want to know how many Cyber Essentials certifications we've gone through, because it's probably into the thousands. But that's just, we know the scheme, we know IASME, we work with IASME on a lot of stuff as well. So if we ever get sort of a bit confused over potentially infrastructure, because every infrastructure is different, everything changes from a technology perspective, we know that we can go speak to IASME and get their viewpoint. So we're actually collaborating with it so that we can help companies to get to a point of being Cyber Essential certified, rather than just going, oh no, I don't think we can help you with this. That's the main point of what we try and do. I think in terms of sort of, I said our process, which I think okay, Ree, if I go across to you, and our process much more than I do now.
Yeah, sure, that's not a problem. So generally with our CE clients, what we do is once you're fully on board, you'll be assigned your own consultant, and that'll be your touch point for everything Cyber Essentials, but any other governance-based questions, you'll just have that main point of contact there. And what we'll do is we'll just start running through the question set with you. So some people like to have a look at it and go, yep, done, this is a renewal, whatever, go through fairly quick. Other people, especially if it's their first time, want that more kind of guidance and advice piece. So that's what we'll do. We'll sit on a Teams call, we'll run through the question set, take as much time as we need. We can go back and forth on certain areas. What we really try and put effort into is making sure that you're implementing the controls in the best way that works for you. We don't want this to be a tick box exercise. We want this to be something that's going to really strengthen your organization and something that you can build on year in year as well. So that's what we'll do. And then you have that consultant there. If you ever want to build to a more ISMS kind of piece, more towards your IASME ISO, anything like that, you also just have that consultant that's there for you year round pretty much. And that's our process.
Yeah, perfect. And again, very similar from a plus side of things from us as well. So you have a designated consultant, you have touch points, you have regular contact, you have advice, guidance, feedback. I think that's the thing that we try and do as much as possible, because again, there may be a certain vulnerability that might not be patched in a certain way, or it might be a little bit tricky to sort of the automated patches to actually rectify the situation. But that's where we've got a team of qualified C plus assessors who can go, right, this is what you do to help remediate against that. So again, it's adding that value and advice to everything we do, rather than just marking it, as we said, and then going, right, off you go, you try and fix it yourself, because that's not what we want to do. We want everyone. It'd be lovely if everyone in the UK was part of the Cyber Essential scheme, because we'd probably be a much securer nation. So that's our mission, to kind of help as many people as possible. I think in that sort of, again, to give people a bit of an insight into what we see as well. As I said earlier, we'll go on to sort of the common challenges of what we find. And I think this kind of blends into Joe's point earlier about not knowing where to go or who to trust. I mean, a lot of companies nowadays will have IT providers who, and we've seen it sadly, where they'll ask for additional resource on top of the contract you're already paying to help them to fill out the Cyber Essentials form. We'll have bits where, oh no, you need to purchase this bit of equipment to then be compliant to Cyber Essentials. Is a lot of common challenges we have and we see is, who do you go to for advice? Who knows best? What are they going to do? And I think what we also find within this as well is, a lot of companies nowadays will have almost a trust element around who they use an IT provider, which is absolutely fine. Not denying that trust is a lovely way to have a business relationship, but you also need to verify that trust with visibility. So if you ask for questions, right, have we got software that's coming end of life over the next year? Have we got devices that are going to be end of life over the next year? And you get a response back is, yes, this is our plan to fix it. Great. You know that you've got a really trusted partner there. If you don't get a response, and you don't get another response, and you suddenly have no visibility about what's happening, then that trust sort of diminishes. And we saw it a lot with the recent update to 2012 servers. 2012 R2 servers that went end of life last year. Again, a lot of small organizations who had those in place knew that they were going to come end of life, and it's that almost project management type situation that you want to have with an IT provider. Be like, right, well, we know this is coming up, so let's plan for it, let's budget it, rather than our Cyber Essentials is due, we've got loads of end of life systems, we're running on support stuff, what do we do next? Because that's where it becomes panic, it becomes chaotic, it becomes stressful. If you know about it a year before, you can plan and you can resource. And that's what cybersecurity should all be about, is knowing what you've got, how you're currently protecting it, what the impact would be if you didn't protect it, and what your roadmap is to try and improve on that as well.
One thing I should say there, John, is something that we're putting out already, is that Windows 10 is actually going to be end of life this year in October. I'd just like to mention that for the reasons you said, because the more warning people have about that, the more time they have to think about what they're gonna do about that situation. So, yeah, Windows 10, everyone, is end of life this year. I just wanted to put that in there for you.
No, that's it, isn't it? Because then at that point you go, right, can we replace it? Is it a mission critical system? Is it going to take longer to do? And if it is mission critical, then you do, as you said earlier, you descope it, you segment it from a main network. It means that the whole organization can achieve Cyber Essentials, but it means you've almost gone to that risk-based decision to segment it whilst you're finding an alternative to then bring it into a supported system, which is really, really important. Reed, did you want to cover off of the cloud services and internal resource and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. So I think another one we see very often is issues with around cloud services and applying MFA to them, which is one of the core pieces of the standard, really. We do a lot of time have people come to us and they're not even sure what cloud services they're using or certain departments, what they're up to. So a good way to address that is sometimes we'll sit on a call and just kind of say, right, run us through your day-to-day work. What do you use? And they give you a list and you're like, that's a cloud service, that's a cloud service, that's a cloud service. And all of a sudden, they kind of get a bit more insight over their infrastructure. And they're like, oh, right, yes, we do have this, this, and this. And now how do we protect it? Another big kind of issue we find with the cloud services is people aren't really sure if there is MFA even available for their service. So a lot of the time, the service is offering it, but they're just not sure how to enable it, particularly to their standard users. So yeah, that's a big one that we see, but it's one that can be overcome. And it's a big piece for C and CEP. So it's one that we really do try and roll out as soon as possible for any of our clients. And then probably the other big problem that we see is people start the Cyber Essentials process, but they're not really sure of the scope of what's required for the assessment. We always say that cybersecurity in general, it's not just the job of your IT department. It's not just the job of your office manager if you've assigned it to them. It really should be a whole organization piece. And a lot of the time, if you are in a rush to get it, maybe you need it for a tender, it does get given just towards an office manager, get this done. And then you don't really have the internal resource assigned to do the certification properly. So those are probably the two big challenges that we kind of see day to day with it.
Cool, perfect. And then the last point with the bring your own device and contractors. So bring your own devices, personal devices. Everyone uses them. Most people use them for emails now. It's pretty uncommon if you don't. And those are all in scope. Just to kind of reiterate that point, because I'm sure Joe will probably say the same. Personal
Yes.
devices definitely in scope.
If you're accessing anything to do with your company's data, they are in scope, yeah, because because otherwise that's literally just another route into the system. And yes, there are difficulties with this, but you can also manage it, things like Intune that won't let you on the network unless you're up to date and things like that. So, but it is very important to include those in the scope.
Yeah, exactly. And contractors, again, there's a fine line as to whether they're contractors with devices that you provide, that they provide, and things like that. But again, it's just having that knowledge of what is in scope and what's not in scope, which is where someone like ourselves at PureCyber can help you define that, and also help to guide you as to how to make sure anything in scope is compliant. I know that I've had a 5-minute warning pop up there. I've been nodded at by my marketing team about having a 10-minute warning a couple of minutes ago. So we might go a little bit quicker through the rest of it, but we'll try and cover as much as we can. But I think we've got a lot of cyber essentials all covered off there. I think from our point of view, and it's something we always kind of touch on as well, is cyber essentials plus are great as entry points, great as baseline, but they're not the end of your what should be your cybersecurity journey. Reed, do you want to touch quickly on the level 1, level 2 of IASME as well?
Sure. So IASME, much like Cyber Essentials, backed by the NCSC, but differing from Cyber Essentials, you kind of step forward from just implementing the technical controls and you move towards a bit more of a governance piece where you start really building your own information security management system. So when you do level 1, you're going to start looking at things like risk registers, asset registers, data protection, incident response, business continuity. A lot of people actually call it a baby ISO 27001 because it's being created as a governance-based accreditation that you don't need to have the kind of time and resource that you would need for maybe one of the bigger certs. Like CE, level 1 is a self-assessment. So again, it's just you filling it out and us marking it for you. And then the level 2, which I would personally really recommend, is the audited version. So again, there's no new requirements based against level 1, but what it would be, you'd be sat with one of our consultants, probably no more than a few hours to a day at most. And off the back of that, we would write you up an audit report, much like if you were doing the ISO, and you will find out there if you're compliant with everything, if you have any kind of opportunities for improvement or non-compliances there.
And I think this, like I say, Rhea, it's a really good one to recommend because I think Cyber Essentials Plus, they're very well known in the marketplace now. Everyone's heard of them. They're included in tenders. IASME is a really, really good standard to get involved in the next step up, because it becomes more of a risk-based accreditation as well. So you combine that. So if you've got Cyber Essentials, which is a technical accreditation, and then you have IASME, which is more of a risk-based one, suddenly you have the makings of a really, really good structure to your security processes and policies and way that you work, which is a really good thing of doing it. Sorry, Joe, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say,
No.
yeah, the important thing, the important difference really between Cyber Essentials and the schemes you're mentioning here is particularly ISO, is that Cyber Essentials is basically like an MOT, just like an MOT. Either you changed your default passwords or you didn't. Either your tires are bold or they're not. It's one of these. Whereas the ISO is a bit more risk based in that it's up to the company to say, do we want to do this? What might the consequences be? Compare it with their risk matrix. The reason Cyber Essentials is done that way is because it's meant to, as we've been saying the whole time, provide a baseline level of security. So Cyber Essentials is technically a prescriptive scheme, ISO, and these ones are risk based. And the difference is the company makes the decision on the risk, whereas with Cyber Essentials, the risk decision has been made by the NCSC, is the important thing to grasp there.
Which is why we always recommend trying to go to that level 1, level 2 for the by IASME, because it does bring in the elements of a risk stuff as well. And it's a low cost, it's still aimed at small, medium enterprises. And it is, if you can combine your risk with your technical controls, then actually you've got a really good basis for making sure you're protecting your systems and your users and your customers and your supply chain and everyone else in between as much as you possibly can, which is great. I think in terms of what we've gone through today, I think we've covered a lot. I appreciate we are getting right up to the window now of the hour, which we must have timed that perfectly. It's been really great. Again, I think just to kind of cap on where we've looked at the scheme, we've looked at the benefits, we've looked at the impact if you don't, we've looked at sort of next steps and what you could potentially do. I think from this point on, I just want to thank you, Joe, really for jumping on and talking to us. It's been great to have that knowledge and expertise from IASME to come here and talk to everyone as well. It's been really valuable.
Well, you're very welcome, and thanks for having me, because I do like doing these kind of presentations, and it is always good to talk to our assessors and our CBs and people out in the field doing the good work that you're doing. So thank you very much for that, and thank you everyone who's come to listen to this presentation as well. I hope you found something useful in it, and I hope this has been helpful for people. So
It's almost like you've done these kind of talks before, Joe.
I have done a few, yes.
Perfect. No, it's great. And I think in terms of next steps and what you can do with us and, the follow on that you've got there in front of your screen, so you can obviously get in touch with us and we can look at doing the Cyber Essential side of things. Absolutely not a problem at all. That's what we're here for. We can provide guidance. We can have an initial call, see whether it's right for you and what's going to be best. You've also got something there called the Cyber Health Check, which will be more of a, I suppose, Cyber Essentials Plus combined into one with a few of like user awareness simulations with phishing and stuff like that. We've also got the cyber consultancy services that my team do there. There's a lot on there. Obviously, visit the website. There's loads that we can do as well. We've also got a few events in London coming up at the end of February for Wales Week London, just so that everyone knows about that. So again, check out the events page on the website. And I think I'm just checking my notes now to make sure I've covered everything from the marketing perspective. I mean, that's everything that we've got there. If there's anything you need, any help, any guidance, if you just want to chat to us, then please reach out. Again, thank you so much, Joe and IASME, for being here. Thank you so much for being here and supporting me as well. And I think that's everything today. We'll send out a recording of this webinar to everyone who attended. We've also got some marketing material that will come out based around the changes to IASME in the next question set slot, which we haven't really touched on so far, but that'll be coming out as well. And a short feedback survey, which would be grateful for you to complete. Sorry, I knew there was one more I'd miss. Obviously, if there's any questions, feel free to raise them. I'm free for a little bit, but if you want to drop off, absolutely fine.
I'm just going to put a quick plug in this chat as well for the Cyber Essentials Knowledge Hub, which is a sort of central repository. It's aimed at a general audience. It's not, well, obviously technical people when you use it too. There's a lot of articles and information on there about how to set things up and why these things are where they are. So I've just added that to the chat as well.
Cool. And again, it's a great little place that you can start and have a look through it all. But yeah, any advice, any guidance, then we're always here to help. I believe that's everything from today. So just again, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate everyone's time, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank
That's all.
you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.